Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special episode of The Guys Who Stared. Cade Kennedy with you alongside Tyler Riggs. And Tyler, we have a fun news day, something that I'm glad it happened. I did not think this would happen for another month and a half. We wouldn't get into this till late November, early December. But Seth Littrell is no longer the offensive coordinator, or at least co-offensive coordinator at Oklahoma. Tyler, it is truly a happy day.
I don't know if I'd say happy. Sad that it didn't work out because you want to root for a guy that had been as part of as much success as he was as a player, right?
Yeah.
But it needed to happen. I mean, it just things turned sour, and I had defended the other angle, if you will, on previous instances, just because I thought it was fair. But we'll get into it in a second. But what you saw this past week, I think the writing was pretty on the wall early in that game that something needed to happen.
Absolutely. And when I was at the Cotton Bowl down there for the OU Texas game, you could start to get that feeling that okay, this is going nowhere fast. Yes, Texas has a good defense, but at the same time, when you're only putting up 3 points, and then it turns into the South Carolina game when you only put up 9, you have the disaster we'll get into in a moment. Just it felt like a much needed change was going to have to happen. It'll be Joe John Finley, who is the other co-offensive coordinator and tight ends coach. He will become the main play caller. That's not the only move for Oklahoma. Offensive analyst Kevin Johns, who was the offensive coordinator at Duke, keep that in mind, worked with Riley Leonard last year. He gets to be elevated up to co-offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. And that's something that's important as well, Tyler, because Oklahoma will finally have someone in that quarterback's coach role that has done that before. That was one of the big kind of head scratchers when it came to Seth Littrell hire, was that he had never done that before, putting him in kind of an interesting territory there.
Yeah, and having, as we know nowadays, right? You hate to put so much emphasis on one position in was often a 50-plus roster in terms of a sport of football. But man, if you don't have that quarterback feeling comfortable from the offensive staff in whatever manner, whether you don't have the right quarterbacks coach, OC, that's gonna you know trump everything else. You've got to have that QB. We know how that goes, whether it's high school, college, pros. You want to be comfortable in that quarterback position. So, from the comments that Jackson Arnold seemingly made after the game yesterday or Saturday, I should say, it kind of was some writing on the wall in the sense that you could tell he wasn't happy with how the situation was, and I think Brevitables rightly responded in that sense. So hopefully, that will kind of satisfy his worries a bit in terms of Arnold's worries.
Absolutely. And so I kind of want to do a as quick of a recap as you can on this game. It was 35-9, South Carolina just obliterating Oklahoma. We're kind of putting this here because I don't have to put OU in fraud alert for the second week in a row.
Yeah,
So that
it
helps
deserves its
too.
own. Yes,
It
yeah,
deserves its own separate video that we can kind of mash in here. You want to talk about the worst start to a game you could ever imagine? I
mm,
mean, we're talking
mm.
downright comedic proportions of bad. 3 turnovers in the first 5 minutes of the game. South Carolina jumps up 21-0. Boos raining down from the stadium. Michael Hawkins Jr. gets benched, deservingly so. Unfortunately for the kid, you liked seeing him play. He showed a lot of heart against Tennessee and Auburn, but you can't turn the ball over 3 times in a row. Some of it not his fault. When your tight ends aren't blocking and your O-line's not blocking, you have 1 second to make a decision. That's a rough place to be put in. It's not 100% all on him, but still rough to say the absolute least. Jackson Arnold comes in, throws for 225. That doesn't seem like a lot. Why is that significant? It's the first time Oklahoma had a 200-yard passer all season. It was the first time Oklahoma scored a touchdown in the third quarter all season. A lot of things that are technically improvements when I say them, but you would never guess that they were. Oklahoma had 4 turnovers in the game, had 6 fumbles in the game, only lost 2 of them. Just another ho-hum day for an opposing defense, walking in realizing that they didn't have to do a whole lot because Oklahoma's defense, if you know the one thing they're going to be good at this year, it's beating themselves.
Yeah, and listening to the OU radio broadcast, to roll of those guys, Teddy Lehman, Gabe Eichert were talking about at the end of the day, and this is where I kind of changed on the whole situation because Gabe pointed us out on their podcast that they do weekly. He talked about, hey, and I mean, anybody that follows South Carolina could know this, but knew that they were going to have two defensive ends that you could argue should be NFL talent. And those are the guys you cannot let beat you that you would have to focus on, especially if you're an the offensive side of the ball. And what do we do on that first play? Who's blocking? Bauer Sharp, one-on-one. I mean, that right there tells you that either A, the offense, game plan wise was not where it needed to be, not focused enough, or B, they just think way too much of, a certain player or whatever to think, hey, you've got an NFL level defensive end and we're going to put them with one-on-one with the tight end. What are you doing? I
Absolutely.
mean, a high school staff would realize that's not smart,
Hmm.
So that's where it's like, okay, clearly this is more than just, well, we're banged up, we're injured. No, if that's happening, then yeah, it's time to reset. So unfortunate, but you just can't let that stuff happen because I mean that's what killed them the entire game. Everybody could have told you, hey, South Carolina's got really good pass rush. You might want to take extra focus on that. When you clearly don't, or don't come up with a good answer to it, and again, no, the options are limited, but you've got to at least try. And it just didn't seem like the effort was there.
No, and that led to 9 sacks by 9 different South Carolina players. I think if it wasn't 15 tackles for loss total, it was darn near close to it. I know at one point it was at least 13. It was Oklahoma had, and it felt like nearly half their plays went 0 yards or less. I can't believe that's a sentence I have to say. And going back to the Bauer Sharp mismatch, that's something that, Tyler, we talked about even back in the Tennessee game. Why is Jackson
Yeah,
Arnold plowing ahead into, someone like James Pierce, who is much bigger than him and is much stronger than him and is going to possibly punch the ball away? And that's exactly what happened in that game. Even going to the Houston game, I know we talked about it leaving that game, that, that was the first of the real head scratching decisions you started to see, where at the time you could believe, okay, maybe Houston's playing as tough. This has happened before with Willie Fritz and all these other things. But, every week when you start to feel like it's, not really a different excuse, just trying to find a different reason to explain what you just saw, you're going to have to hit that reset button at some point. And with Joe John Finley taking over as one of the, as the main play caller, I guess, so to speak, I don't know if he's lasting this season. I think he's going to be gone with how bad the tight end room is going to be at Oklahoma. And that's just another level of this, because now this has kind of opened the floodgates to, okay, well, now maybe we can criticize DeMarco Murray. What have the running backs been doing? Absolutely nothing. Okay, what has the offensive line been doing under Bill Bedenbaugh? That seems to be the big one, because yes, Bill Bedenbaugh's had some amazing offensive lines here at Oklahoma. There's no doubt about that. You can think of 2018 is obviously going to be the big one that always comes up. But this is a what have you been doing for me lately type of business. As much as we all want this to be one big happy family at the end of the day, that's not what you're supposed to do, especially in this era now of college football. Your goal is to win.
yeah. I mean, that's where when we talk, people talk about, well, it feels like kind of the pros. Well, this is the part of it that does, especially on the coaching side, because it's a very fluid situation. When, and I'm sure we'll talk about in the recap tomorrow, but look at Indiana, right? You hire a head coach who's very successful in James Madison. He brings 16 players, and it instantly turns around Indiana's fortunes, within that one hire. And of course, they go identify other really good talent in the portal, and boom, you got magic, right? So when it's that short term of a seemingly year to year, things can swing big if you're not even Georgia, Alabama, right? We've seen some definite struggles there, or successes, however you want to paint it. Um, so yeah, you've got to make decisions swift and quick, because when you don't, you let things linger. When you want to be a top program, it goes quick, and I think this will kind of. I think this is definitely a message you touched on. Okay, now you analyze deeper what's going on with the running backs, what's going on with the offensive line. I think this was at least a message from Brett Venables, basically saying, hey, you know, I got rid of my own guy in Seth Littrell, right? So everybody can be on the chopping block. If you aren't on it, we're gonna take care of that. And that might seem selfish from Venables, because you might say, well, he's just trying to save his job, but you would rather him do something and kind of send that message of, okay, guys, we got to tighten up, versus just inactivity because, he's like, well, it's my guy, whatever. Nope. He sent that message. Now everybody better be on the up and up, doesn't matter what side of the ball.
Absolutely. And I mean that's where we're heading. It feels weird that this almost feels like the second season for Oklahoma now. We've had the first part of the year was a failure. We can all objectively look back at that now. It was a failure. And this is a team that, we both thought would maybe win 8 games this year, hopefully. And that was the expectation. And you're still technically can hit that. It's not
Yeah,
going to happen. You're just going to have to beat Ole Miss, Missouri, Alabama, and LSU and Maine to get 9. You can afford one loss if you still want to hit, what everyone thought you could do this year. But I just want to take a look at the numbers here for Oklahoma. One time as a whole, the whole Seth Littrell experiment summarized 23 points per game. That was where Oklahoma's offense was at. You look at, passing. Okay, you got 176 passing yards per game, 9 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, 29 sacks allowed on the year for 184 yards lost there. For rushing, 256 attempts for 785 yards. That's 3 yards per carry, 7 rushing touchdowns there. And you look at offense as well, yards per game, 288.1. Some of the offenses we're about to talk about here, because I've got my list of 4 guys that I don't know how likely it's going to be. 2 of them I think are very likely, 2 of which are kind of my personal preferences. Some of those guys have more total yards on one category, passing or running, than Oklahoma's had total yards this year on average. Wow. And that's just, it sounds pathetic, and that's because when you're a blue blood like Oklahoma, let's be honest, it absolutely is pathetic. This is
I think for a MAC team, it might be pathetic.
Yeah, I say depending on the MAC team or Sun Belt team. You think James Madison would be happy with that? No, they wouldn't. They'd be disgusted, as are just about everybody else. But Tyler, I've got a unofficial list. Off the top of my head, some guys that I think would be the best hire, and it really comes down to a decision here. And this is a hard one to get to. I'd consider this my 1A and 1B, if you will. And I kind of want to get your thoughts on this as well. I think the 1A guy right now has got to be Mike Shanahan. That is the offensive coordinator at Indiana, only 34 years old, probably the most likely or second most likely name you're going to hear get tossed around during this entire search. And there's a good reason for that. Indiana has the number 1 scoring offense in America right now, putting up 48.7 points per game, 310 yards through the air, 202 yards on the ground. And oh yeah, they just beat Nebraska 56-7. That's going to be fresh in the minds of a lot of people. When you look at Oklahoma putting up 9, you see Indiana putting up 56. You're thinking, have we switched here? I know they're both red and white. One looks like what you expect. One looks like what you don't expect. But, I mean, Mike Shanahan, he's a guy that's always been around. Kirk Cignetti, he is a winner. We've talked about him a lot on this show. And something that's just really interesting to me, that Mike Shanahan obviously came from James Madison as well as Coach Cignetti. 2 All-American selections at wide receiver, and 6 of his players earned all-conference honors in his 3 seasons as OC there with the Dukes. A quarterback for James Madison was either the Sun Belt Player of the Year or Offensive Player of the Year all 3 years he was there. And even during 2022, something I really enjoyed, his team was number 6 in the country in time of possession. How many games have we seen this year for Oklahoma where the offense gets on the field, gets off the field, the other team wails on them, and you get to a 35-25 split or something around those lines where you could tell the defense gets absolutely gassed? For a guy who wants to have that control in Brent Venables, where you want your defense to stay, not only healthy in terms of, physically strong, but also the component of just the game itself. You don't want them to get winded or tired, exhausted, whatever word you want to say. I think that's a big point as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's building blocks of a successful offense, right? Is one that at the very least can sustain drives, especially when you have a great defense. You want to be able to play some ball control. I mean, a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, it's what we do. You run the ball, may not score all the time, but hey, they at least keep that defense fresh enough to make big plays, and that's why they win ball games.
Absolutely. You just had to throw that in there since they won tonight. You just had to put that in there.
What
But
Russ took, baby. In Russ we trust. Day one Russ supporter.
there you go. Okay. We will believe that for you, Tyler. But the next guy to get to, the 1B, if you will, that's got to be Brennan Marion. Offensive coordinator at UNLV, played at Tulsa his junior and senior year. If you want to tie back to the state of Oklahoma, there it is, literally played at Tulsa. UNLV so far this year putting up 43.6 points per game, 177 yards through the air, which is not a lot, but 251 yards per game on the ground. And that is because of the go-go offense, Tyler. The go-go emphasizes tempo, spacing, and just good old-fashioned downhill running. It would be an interesting offense to see. Marion's the only guy that runs this. The only problem that comes with running something like this, a completely different scheme, I think, you've got to get your guys for it. And I don't know if you're Brent Venables to say, hey, I might get fired next year if the offense is really bad again. If I mess this higher up, do I want to bring in a guy that doesn't stay at places long usually, maybe a year or two, possibly 3 at the max? Do I want to bring someone in like that? And if it busts immediately because you don't have the right guys year one, now I'm on the chopping block. And now everyone's really upset at me, and we've got to move in a new direction. And one more point to mention on Marion as well. He was a wide receiver coach at Pittsburgh in Texas. Some guys you might know there. Jordan Addison at Pittsburgh. Yeah, he was his wide receiver coach. Some guy named Xavier Worthy that's lighting it up with Kansas City. Yeah, he was the wide receiver coach there at Texas with him.
Yeah, that one's kind of I wouldn't say fully riskier, but it is one for the points you mentioned that, man, if you miss on that one, it's done, right? As far as Venables goes, because of you may not keep a quarterback happy with that, right? Mentioned the lack of passing yards, more run focus. Okay, do you trust that DeMarco's built a good enough stable of running backs that you could lose a guy like Jackson Arnold maybe in the portal and it'd be okay? Um, that would be an interesting one, just for the factors that be. Plus, okay, sticks around for 2 years, has success, but then bounces and you're right back in to, oh crap, you got to identify the right guy at that point. So, but that is also kind of the state of college football. Nick Saban, as much as he may not have liked the way college football had trended over the last couple of years, one thing he was doing a phenomenal job of, Cade, towards the end of his tenure, was identifying a Lane Kiffin, was identifying, Bill O'Brien, some of those guys that he knew were very smart at what they did. Maybe wasn't the best personality fits, but would welcome them into the program, let them do their thing, and then they move on, right? And he was cool with that, and he was very successful because he was able to get out of them what he needed. So, can Brett handle something like that? I don't know. That would be a potential question you'd have to think about should you hire a guy like that.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing here is, before I get to my next pick, this is some that I want to bring up with this. Some people always look for a fit or a connection that, hey, this guy was at this place or has a tie back to Oklahoma or has a tie back to somewhere around the area. This guy that I'm about to talk about, as far as I know, doesn't have that connection, but at this point, does it really matter? I'm of the belief that it doesn't. You go out and get the best guy for the job. It doesn't matter if he has a tie here or not. Your job is to win, not to bring in someone who knows what Oklahoma is. If you don't know what Oklahoma is at this point, that's a you problem, not an Oklahoma problem. But the guy I'm talking about, young guy, only 31 years old, which is relatively young in coaching years, a guy named Cade Bell. He was the offensive coordinator at Pitt this year, was the offensive coordinator at D2 Valdosta State during their 2018 championship run. If you remember that, Valdosta State, Titletown, USA, down in the Division II ranks. Bell's one of those guys that's continued to bring his way up, was at Western Carolina a few years ago. But now that he's gotten to Pittsburgh, you'd think, okay, well, Pitt is undefeated this year. How have they looked? If you've not seen a Pittsburgh game, they're high flying. 41 points per game, 305 through the air in terms of yardage, 175 on the ground. This is a Pitt offense that has been deadly this year. They've been a lot of fun to watch. There's a reason why Pitt is continuing to win. The only caveat with him, or the contention with him, is being a younger guy. You have that, is maybe he's in a little bit over his head at a place like Oklahoma, but at the same time, you can look at it as, hey, this is a young guy. If Pittsburgh was willing to take a risk on him and it was a success here, Why can't he do the same thing at Oklahoma? In 52 games as an offense coordinator coming into this year, Bell's teams produced more than 500 yards 31 times. So a 60% chance that you're going to have at least 500 yards a game. Keep in mind, look at the screen that I showed earlier if you're watching this on YouTube. 288 is what Oklahoma's at this year. Which would you rather have? I think everyone knows 500 is bigger than 288. And it's baffling to kind of think about when I went through this list of how many good young up and coming coordinators there are. And every day I have to look and think we hired Seth Littrell, Tyler.
Yeah, and for those reasons, the whole Oklahoma connection thing, at least so far in Brent Venables' tenure, has been a big deal. But I think we're at the point where Venables' learning experience might say, hey, you know what? Modern day college football, sometimes that stuff has to go by the wayside a bit, right? Because at the end of the day, the results cure all. So I think you're right in the sense where you might have to look at something where you say, I don't care if he's got the connection or not, because if that's the guy you believe could go get it done, it shouldn't matter, because it's going to take care of itself otherwise. That's just modern sports in general, even at the college level. So I know some people may not like that. I get it, but that's where you're at. It's a results-based business, as we've talked about already. So, and hey, you've seen young, hotshot offensive coordinators work before, a la Lincoln Riley. But the one big point you mentioned there, and I agree with that, is you do worry. Okay, is this a guy that's maybe ready for the big time? Sometimes that can be a little mixed bag. Some guys are, and some guys you quickly find out are not.
Exactly. And I do have one more guy in that same group of if you do want someone with a tie to Oklahoma, or at least around the area, certainly someone we'd know a little bit about. That's Ben Arbuckle, who's the offensive coordinator at Washington State from a place called Canadian Texas that Tyler and we are very familiar with.
A
Being
football factory, folks.
exactly somewhere that we're familiar with, a young guy, 29 years old, when he was hired at Washington State 2 years ago, one of the youngest offensive coordinators you could ever find, was able to work around with Cam Ward there at Wazoo last year before he transferred to Miami. But Washington State still a high-powered offense this year. So I think if you want to go with that connection there, I think another guy to look at would be Craddock, the offensive coordinator at Tulane. He was a grad assistant, I believe, at Clemson when Brent Venables got over there. They technically were on the same staff for, I want to say, 2 or 3 years there. Obviously, we've seen Tulane a little bit. We've talked about them on this show before. They are still a fun offense to watch this year. But the last guy I want to throw out here on my list, and this is because you knew we weren't going to get through an entire episode of this, no matter how long or short, without throwing Vanderbilt in somehow. Tim Beck, offensive coordinator at Vanderbilt. The numbers aren't as big as the others, only 33 points per game, 201 through the air, 162 on the ground. But Tim Beck, I mean, you want to talk about a guy that's been a part of building programs these past few years at New Mexico State for 2 years. Now at Vanderbilt, you're seeing what the Commodores are doing. You want an experienced guy with national championship experience. Yes, it's on the lower level, 2011 at Pittsburgh State. That's a D2 school. There's your connection there, being, that Kansas area. Brent's a Kansas guy as well. That could definitely be interesting there. He's a guy that's not afraid to get a little bit crafty with his schemes. If you've watched a Vanderbilt game, you know they run some odd stuff at times. If his offense can do that at Vanderbilt, Tyler, imagine what that could possibly look like at Oklahoma. Imagine, if Diego Pavia can run that at Vanderbilt, a gutsy guy that's just running off pure adrenaline sometimes and just makes some magical plays. Imagine what you could look like with all the money in the world, all the resources in the world thrown into it.
Yeah, and the two possibilities you brought up there of Arbuckle and somebody that's really crafty as well. It's just you salivate at some of those opportunities because you mentioned Arbuckle, especially with hey, look what we did with Cam Ward. You mentioned Beck being able to get it done with Diego Pavia, like how they've developed those guys and elevated them is something that you got to have a focus on for a good hire for Jackson Arnold. If he's the guy going forward, I imagine that's probably your guy you stick with going forward, just because now you've seen that, okay, well, maybe Hawkins isn't ready for the moment, and you want to keep Arnold around. So it's a very important decision in that sense. And those two guys definitely, I think, could be good targets for that. And that's something that, regardless of the scheme and all that, one of the big things is you definitely want a couple of OCs that could be great communicators for your quarterback. Because as we know, hey, that's the position, right? So you want
Absolutely.
somebody that can develop. Yeah, hey, of course, I'd vote for Arbuckle just for the Canadian thing. That would be a lot of fun. But no, you definitely want somebody that's got a prolific and creative mind because nowadays, and we saw the Georgia Texas game, right? Where you sometimes have to get a little crafty. Steve Sarkisian, even though he lost, there were some very interesting play designs that worked against OU. Georgia scouted well, obviously coming into the week, but you want a difference maker in that sense. And Venables can respect that. He's a very sharp defensive mind that often gets very creative with the schemes, right? Oklahoma's been touted as, hey, we've got essentially multiple defense that's going to throw a lot of different looks at you.
Absolutely. And I just want to leave with one final point here. Looking at this screen that I've got up here, and just, every time we go through these names, it just rings out to me more and more that, what I'm not worried about this as much as some OU fans might be, and it's kind of led to the point of what I talked about before, Cade Bell. If a new guy comes in and says, hey, I've got some guys I want to bring with me, some coaches and staff, Oklahoma, I don't want to say get ready to throw everyone away because I don't know if that would happen or not. But I would not be opposed to, and this might just be more emotions talking from what happened on Saturday, but I would not be, opposed to that happening. I really wouldn't. If someone came and Mike Shanahan said, "Hey, I've got some guys from Indiana that I've been around with and all this for a while now, and that success is there and that staff's built in together, yeah, come to Oklahoma, take all of them, push out whoever we need to, with the exception of maybe Emmett Jones, who gets a pass because of how beat up the wide receiver room has been this year, which that could be a whole nother video of its own." I think really that doesn't seem to bother me that much. I think whoever you get as offensive coordinator, you've just got to let them do their thing. Let Brent be the head coach and put his expertise, on the defensive side. That's what he's clearly good at. That's why you hired him in the first place. Let's let the offensive coordinator do their thing.
My big deal of that, to your point, the only thing, the two that I would say, hey, you need to keep no matter what offensively as a staff. Say what you want about the production of the running backs, but as far as recruiting goes, DeMarco's done a very good job.
Yeah.
These guys have the pedigree. They're not producing for various reasons, and that could be a different discussion. But DeMarco's recruited them well,
Yeah.
so that's something I think DeMarco at least deserves a little bit more rope, and Emma Jones, obviously, yes. On paper, the receiver room looks really good, but the injuries have just been devastating. So I don't think you could give him a fair grade on that. And he's identified some really good difference makers, over the last couple of seasons in the portal as well. So I would say you got to keep those two around. But my big deal is, again, whether it's new OC or whether it's somebody that comes with the OC, you've got to get a dedicated quarterbacks coach. Got to happen.
Absolutely.
Somebody that you feel really comfortable can handle developing those guys. That's got to be the utmost priority above all to me. And the scheme and all that could come after that, but get you somebody that can communicate with those quarterbacks and get them going in the right direction because you've got talent in that room. Between Arnold, I think Hawkins has shown enough. He's young, he's talented. So whichever one winds up going forward, because I don't think both of them we keep probably by the end of the season. But man, bring somebody that can develop that room, man. Do it. So that's what I worry about the most. So
Absolutely.
unless we just hire somebody that could, hey, we're gonna run 300 yards a game, not necessarily Army, but it feels like it. Sure,
I
okay,
was about
whatever.
to say, I saw people were advocating for, can we get Boise State's offensive coordinator and somehow
Yes,
get Ashton Genty and just watch magic happen? And
and I've had friends say that, say,
yeah,
hey, give me Boise State's guy. Okay, but Genty's not sticking around, folks. I hate to tell you
yeah, I
that.
was going
That
to say,
man's going for the
as fun as
pros.
that would be to see Oklahoma try to bounce back, but like, you know what? We're just going to luck into an eighth Heisman Trophy winner. No problem. It's going to be
Yeah.
fine. We'll see if he can go back to back, maybe, depending on how this season plays out. But I do want to leave on one point that at least if any of the hires that we talked about today are successful with Oklahoma, because I know Utah just fired their offense coordinator as well. So the great coaching
Yeah.
race is
Well,
about to
he
be on.
resigned, didn't
Okay,
fire,
Utah
resigned.
fans wanted him fired, so I'll give their fan base credit there. I've seen some people already say, "Hey, maybe Ludwig at Oklahoma." No, thank you. We're good. We're already Crimson Iowa. I don't want to hire the guy from Red Iowa. Let's not do this.
Yeah.
Let's not do this year. But I do want to at least go on one final tangent here that, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. If we get any of these guys that we've talked about tonight, that will finally be over. We will not finally be insane anymore. This has been the insane season for Oklahoma, and I'm finally ready for it to stop. There are 5 games left. If we're lucky, we'll get a 6th. I don't think we're getting one, at least at this moment. Let's just let this season in. And I hate saying this, but we just got to let this season play out. It's not going to be a whole lot of improvement for the rest of the year, but we got to look forward to it. Basketball season starts Tuesday. It's Thunder and Mavs time. Thunder for you, Tyler. No, Mavericks for me. I hate saying that. That's just where we've been this year. That's just where we're going.
Yeah, and I will say on the the final OU point I got too. We talked a little bit about Joe John. Mentioned that he is taking over. Hey, it's a good audition for him, right? Because he's been the co-guy. Let's see how things change with him as the lead guys for in terms of play calling. So maybe he finds some magic there. I'm not saying he will.
Yeah, I was
But
gonna say
I'm sure
I
Joe
expect
John's got to
nothing.
realize, hey, yeah, I mean, you probably know that's fair, but who knows? Who knows? So we'll see how that turns out. Any possibilities open. You just
I
hope,
guess so.
the big thing. I was talking with a friend about it, another friend, and it said, "Hey, can't get any worse, right?" So just hope you see something of improvement going forward.
I do want to say the last time I said it can't get any worse was the Tennessee game, and then we
Oh,
literally fumbled at the 5-yard line, and then we literally got sacked in the end zone first, or not sacked in the end zone. We had a negative run for a safety. So I'm through saying that. I've seen the abyss. It is staring
it can
back.
always get worse.
It can
Yes.
always get worse. I've seen it. We've lived through it before. I'm just praying that this turns into a 2022 at this point. We magically get a ranked win somewhere, preferably Alabama at home. Will that happen? No. That's just wishful thinking. Maybe it'll be Missouri. That's the funniest one, honestly. If we somehow beat Missouri and get 6 wins, that'd be incredible. But
That would be the sweetest one. I'll give you that.
that'd be great. But this has gone on long too long. This could just turn into OU football rambling at this point. It's 11 o'clock at night. We're tired. It's been a long day, and it's a Sunday, so it should
Tired of
not
it
be.
all.
Listen, man. I'll finish with one final point here. Which, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can just click off at this point. This is just rambling at this rate. But like even talking to my dad today, like he was telling me, I've been off and on watching OU games in person since 1980. Like he was telling me stories about, all sorts of stuff. He's always done that his entire life. And when I finally talked to him today, this was the game that broke him. Like we've been through so much stuff, and this is the game that broke him. Where he's like, I don't want to watch this anymore. Where he's just like, this is the worst I've legitimately ever. This is John Blake level bad.
Let's say that's a guy who has been through the
This
John
is a
Blake.
guy who is a season ticket holder through the entire 90s. From Gary Gibbs to Schnellenberger shenanigans for a year to Blake to the rebirth with Bob. And he was just, I've never seen our offense look this inept. And I've never seen amazing, just awe-inspiring dumbness from a team this year that's happened.
Wow.
It's just, we're at a whole new level of bad that I've never experienced in my lifetime. Tyler, I don't know if you've experienced anything like this, but it's rough. And hopefully it'll get better. And I hate that we have to put that hopefully in front of it.
I have experienced something like this, but I'm not going to air it out here. We'll save that for
Okay. We'll save that for when we stop recording here in a few moments. But folks, as always, thank you for watching. If you made it this far, please really do hit the like and subscribe buttons. We do sincerely appreciate it. As well as leave a comment down below. Tell us, if you're an Oklahoma fan, what are you looking forward to in the rest of the season, off season? Who do you want as the offensive coordinator? Are you looking forward to the Thunder or not? Because that's probably a question at this rate, honestly. Feel free to leave any comment down below. If you're not an Oklahoma fan, tell us, what do you expect us to do? I actually do want to hear other people's opinions on this, even if you're a Texas person saying we should hire Charlie Strongers. Something absolutely ridiculous, or Tom Herman. But, and folks, as always, thank you for sticking through this. It's been a fun time. It'll continue to be a fun time. We'll have another We'll get back to our regularly scheduled content throughout this week. This was just a fun little video to do. But until next time, have a good one, everybody.